The science of invisibility. Imagine that you are standing in a grand palace. Trumpets are playing, crowds are cheering, and down the street walks the emperor, proudly showing off his magnificent new outfit. Except he's not wearing anything. You probably know this story, The Emperor's New Clothes, written by Hans Christian Andersen. In the tale, two clever swindlers arrive at the emperor's palace. They claim they can weave a magical cloth so special that foolish or incompetent people cannot see it. Of course, there is one small problem. There is no cloth. The emperor's advisors don't want to admit that they see nothing. The emperor doesn't want to admit it either. So everyone pretends that the imaginary clothes are beautiful. Finally, the emperor marches through the city, wearing absolutely nothing at all. Everyone continues pretending, until one child says what everyone else is thinking, but he isn't wearing anything. And suddenly, the spell is broken. Or is it? Because the story gives us an interesting scientific question. The emperor's clothes were invisible because they didn't exist. But what would have to happen for a real piece of clothing to become truly invisible? To answer that question, we first have to understand something surprisingly simple. Right now, look around you. You might see a chair, a wall, a window, or your own hands. It feels as if your eyes are directly looking at those objects. But that's not quite what's happening. You see an object because light reaches your eyes. Imagine a lamp shining on a red apple. Light travels from the lamp to the apple. The apple absorbs some colors of light and reflects some light back. Some of that reflected light enters your eyes. Your eyes detect the light. Your brain interprets the information. And you say, "That's a red apple." But turn off all the lights, close the curtains, and wait until the room becomes completely dark. The apple is still there, yet you can't see it. Why? Because almost no light from the apple is reaching your eyes. So here is our first big idea. To see something, information carried by light usually has to reach your eyes. No light reaching your eyes means no picture for your brain to work with. In a completely dark room, you and the emperor's imaginary clothes might look exactly the same. Invisible. But light doesn't always travel straight. You may have learned that light travels in straight lines, and most of the time that's a very useful rule. But light can also do some surprising things. It can reflect when it bounces off a surface. It can refract or bend when it travels from one material into another, like from air into water. That's why a straw can look bent when you put it into a glass of water. Light can also be scattered. Tiny particles in the atmosphere scatter sunlight, helping make the sky look blue. And under special conditions, light can even be guided, bent, or redirected in much more complicated ways. So if we wanted to make something invisible, perhaps we could try to control what light does around it. But here's where things get tricky. Transparent isn't the same as invisible. You are probably looking through something transparent right now. A window, perhaps. You can see through glass because much of the light passes through it. But the glass itself isn't perfectly invisible. You can still see its edges. You can see reflections on its surface. Sometimes you can see fingerprints. And if sunlight hits it at the right angle, it can sparkle brightly. That's because some light still reflects or bends as it passes between air and glass. A truly invisible object would have an even harder job. It would need to interact with light in almost exactly the same way as the space around it. Think about a perfectly clean window that somehow behaved exactly like the air around it. Light would pass through without revealing the window's edges, surface, or shape. That's much closer to the scientific idea of invisibility. But transparent clothing creates another problem. Suppose you made a shirt completely transparent. Would that make the person wearing it invisible? No, you would simply see the person underneath the shirt. So a transparent shirt is not really the emperor's dream outfit. It's just a shirt you can see through. So could light go around an object? Now let's try something much stranger. What if light didn't bounce off an object? What if it didn't pass through the object either? What if the light could somehow travel around it? Imagine water flowing around a rock in a stream. The water approaches the rock, splits into two paths, and then comes back together on the other side. Scientists have explored ways of controlling light in a somewhat similar fashion, using specially designed materials called metamaterials. These materials can be engineered so that they interact with light in unusual ways. In certain experiments, researchers have been able to manipulate electromagnetic waves so they travel around particular regions. This has inspired the idea of an invisibility cloak. But before you imagine Harry Potter's cloak hanging in a laboratory, there are some important limitations. Making light go around something is incredibly difficult. Different colors of light behave differently. Light can come from many directions. And a real person is much larger and more complicated than a tiny object in a carefully controlled experiment. So scientists have not created a magical cloak that lets a person walk down the street completely invisible from every angle. Not yet, anyway. And there is another important point. If you made light travel around your entire body might become harder for other people to see. But how would you see? Your eyes need light too. An invisibility cloak would have to solve a very strange problem. How can you hide someone's eyes from incoming light while still allowing those eyes to receive light from the world? Science is full of problems like this. Sometimes solving one problem creates an entirely new one. Sometimes being invisible isn't about light at all. Now let's go back to the emperor. Why did everyone in the story claim to see clothes that weren't there? Their eyes were working perfectly well. The problem wasn't in their eyes. It was in their brains and in the people around them. This brings us to another fascinating truth. Seeing is not just about your eyes. Perception happens in your brain. Your eyes collect light, but your brain decides what that information means. Sometimes your brain can be fooled by optical illusions. Sometimes two people can look at the same picture and notice different things. And sometimes, as in the emperor's story, people may hesitate to say what they really see because everyone around them seems to believe something else. The crowd wasn't blind. In a way, they were afraid to trust their own perception until a child did. Of course, animals have been experimenting with invisibility for millions of years, not by making light magically disappear, but through camouflage. A stick insect looks like a twig. An Arctic hare blends into the snow. An octopus can change its appearance to match its surroundings. These animals aren't actually invisible. Light still reflects from their bodies and reaches your eyes. But their appearance makes it difficult for your brain to separate them from the background. And that gives us a different definition of invisibility. Sometimes, being invisible doesn't mean that nobody can see you. Sometimes it means that nobody notices you. That is a big difference. So, could the emperor ever have truly invisible clothes? Let's review our possibilities. If the clothes don't reflect any light and don't send any light toward your eyes, they might be difficult to see. But then the light has to go somewhere. If the clothes are transparent, you can see through them, but you'll still see the emperor underneath. If the clothes somehow guide light around the emperor, that could make him harder to detect. But creating such a system for a whole moving person, from every direction and for all colors of visible light, is enormously difficult. And even if we solved the physics, we would still have to remember that seeing isn't just physics, it's also perception. Because the most interesting lesson from the emperor's new clothes may not be about whether something can be invisible. It may be about something even more important. Can you trust what you see? Usually, our eyes give us useful information about the world, but sometimes light can trick us. Sometimes our brains can trick us. And sometimes other people can convince us to ignore what is right in front of our eyes. The child in the story didn't have a magical scientific instrument. No microscope, no telescope, no invisibility detector. The child simply looked and trusted the evidence. And maybe that's where fairy tales and science have something important in common. Science begins by asking, what is really there? Then it asks, how do we know? And sometimes, the first step toward discovering the truth is simply having the courage to say, wait a minute, I don't think the emperor is wearing anything at all. Always trust what you see.